The London rain hammered against the windshield of Jason Statham's Range Rover as he sat in the darkened parking garage beneath the Pinewood Studios. The final wrap party for his latest action thriller was in full swing 3 floors above, but he couldn't bring himself to join the celebration. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtered down through the concrete structure, a stark contrast to the hollow feeling that had settled in his chest. At 56, Jason had perfected the art of controlled violence on screen. Every punch, every car chase, every death-defying stunt was choreographed to perfection. But sitting alone in his car, still wearing the designer suit from the wrap party he'd abandoned, he felt anything but in control. The adrenaline that had sustained him through months of filming had finally worn off, leaving behind something he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge: emptiness. His phone buzzed with messages from his agent, his publicist, his trainer, all the people who managed the machine that was Jason Statham, action hero. But none of them knew the man who sat behind the wheel, wondering when making movies had stopped feeling like creating art and started feeling like assembling products on a factory line. He started the engine, its low growl echoing off the concrete walls. The familiar sound usually comforted him, but tonight it felt hollow. As he pulled out of the garage and onto the wet London streets, he had no destination in mind. Just the need to move, to escape the suffocating weight of his own success. The city looked different through rain-streaked windows, softer somehow, less defined. He drove aimlessly through Soho, past the theaters where he'd once dreamed of performing Shakespeare, past the gyms where he'd trained for his early roles when everything still felt possible. Now, 15 years into his action career, he felt trapped in his own image, the tough guy who never showed weakness, never broke character, never admitted that sometimes the violence on screen followed him home in his dreams. He pulled over near Waterloo Bridge, not really knowing why. The Thames flowed dark and endless below, indifferent to the dramas playing out in the city above. Jason sat for a moment, listening to the rain and the distant sound of traffic before stepping out into the night. The rain soaked through his expensive suit immediately, but he didn't care. He walked to the bridge's railing and stood there, looking out over the water. This was where he'd come as a young man, full of dreams and determination, ready to conquer the world. Now he wondered what that young man would think of what he'd become. Bit late for sightseeing, innit? The voice came from behind him, rough with years of hard living, but not unkind. Jason turned to see a man sitting in the shadows near the bridge's stone pillars. He was perhaps 60, wrapped in layers of worn clothing, a sleeping bag tucked around his legs. His face was weathered by years of outdoor living, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Sorry," Jason said, suddenly aware that he might be intruding on someone's shelter. "I didn't see you there." The man chuckled, a sound that held more wisdom than bitterness. "Most people don't. Part of being invisible, I suppose." He studied Jason's face in the dim streetlight. "You're that actor, aren't you? The one who punches things." Jason almost smiled despite himself. "That's one way to put it. Mind if I ask what brings a famous action hero out in the piss? Poor weather to stare at muddy water?" There was something disarming about the man's directness. No starstruck excitement, no request for photos or autographs, just genuine curiosity from one human being to another. "Honestly," Jason said, surprising himself with his candor, "I'm not sure. Just needed to get away from everything." The man nodded knowingly. "Everything can be a heavy burden." "I'm Charlie, by the way." "Jason." "I know who you are, mate. Question is, do you?" The words hit harder than any physical blow Jason had taken on screen. He stood there in the rain, designer suit clinging to his frame, while a homeless man he'd just met saw straight through the carefully constructed facade he'd spent years building. "Can I ask you something?" Jason said, moving closer to Charlie's makeshift shelter. "How did you end up here?" Charlie was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Long story, short version. Made some bad choices, had some bad luck, lost some good people. But that's not really what you're asking, is it?" Jason shook his head, realizing Charlie was right. "I suppose I'm wondering how you keep going when everything falls apart." "Ah," Charlie said, patting the ground beside him. "That's the real question. Sit down if you don't mind getting your fancy suit a bit dirtier. Jason hesitated for only a moment before settling down beside Charlie. The stone was cold and wet, but somehow, the simple act of sitting felt like the most honest thing he'd done in months. See, the thing about hitting bottom, Charlie continued, is that you finally stop pretending. All the masks, all the roles you play to keep everyone else comfortable, they don't work anymore when you're sleeping rough and begging for change. You either find out who you really are, or you disappear completely. And who are you? Jason asked, genuinely curious. Charlie smiled, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from his weathered face. I'm someone who loved too hard, trusted too easily, and lost everything because of it. But I'm also someone who discovered that none of that was actually everything. Turns out there's more to a person than their circumstances. Jason thought about this, watching the rain create ripples on the Thames. I feel like I've lost myself somewhere. Like I became this character, this image, and forgot there was supposed to be a real person underneath. What did that real person want? Charlie asked. Before the character took over? The question struck deep. Jason had to think back years, past the action films and the fame and the carefully managed career, to remember who he'd been before all of this. I wanted to tell stories, he said finally. Good stories that mattered. I wanted to make people feel something real. And do you? Make people feel something real? Jason considered this. His films made money, won fights at the box office, gave audiences 2 hours of escape. But real feeling? Connection? He wasn't sure. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I used to. Early on, when I still cared about the craft instead of just hitting my marks and collecting my paycheck. Charlie nodded. The thing about losing yourself is that it usually happens slowly, day by day, compromise by compromise, until one day you wake up and don't recognize the person in the mirror. Exactly, Jason said, surprised by how understood he felt. When did you realize you were lost? When my Sarah died, Charlie said quietly. My wife of 30 years. Cancer took her, and I fell apart completely. Lost the house, the job, the friends, everything that I thought made me who I was. Spent 2 years drinking myself toward joining her, if I'm honest. What stopped you? Charlie pulled out a worn photograph from his jacket pocket. Even in the dim light, Jason could see it was a picture of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She did, Charlie said simply. Not literally, mind you. She was gone. But I started remembering what she used to say about me. Not what I did for work or how much money I made, but who I was when it was just the two of us. How I made her laugh, how I listened when she needed to talk, how I could fix things that were broken. She saw the real you. She did. And she loved that person, not the successful businessman I pretended to be during the day. After she died, I had to learn to see myself through her eyes. To remember that the person she fell in love with was still in there, somewhere under all the pain and self-pity. Jason felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of truth he'd been avoiding. I don't think anyone's ever seen the real me, not in years. That's because you haven't let them, Charlie said gently. Hard to see something that's hidden. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men from completely different worlds finding common ground in their shared humanity. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the city around them seemed to breathe a little easier. Can I tell you something? Jason said eventually. I made a film about 10 years ago. Small budget, independent thing about a father trying to reconnect with his son. Nobody saw it, made no money, got buried by the studio. But making it, I felt alive in a way I hadn't since I was starting out. What happened to that feeling? I let my agents talk me out of projects like that. Too risky, they said. Stick with what works, what sells tickets. I convinced myself they were right, that commercial success was more important than personal satisfaction. Charlie chuckled. Funny how easy it is to convince ourselves that other people know what's best for us better than we do. The thing is, Jason continued, I can afford to take risks now. I have enough money to last several lifetimes, enough clout to get passion projects made. But I've gotten so comfortable being uncomfortable that I've forgotten how to want anything real. So what would you want, if you could want anything? Jason thought about this as he watched a boat make its way slowly down the Thames. I'd want to make something that mattered. something that connected with people on a level deeper than just adrenaline and explosions. I'd want to challenge myself as an actor, take on roles that scared me. Sounds like you know exactly what you want, Charlie observed. Question is, what's stopping you? Fear, I suppose. Fear of failing, of being seen as something other than what people expect. Fear of finding out I'm not as good as I think I am when I step outside my comfort zone. Charlie was quiet for a moment, considering this. You know what I learned living on these streets? Fear is just another story we tell ourselves. And like any story, you can choose whether to believe it or not. But what if I try and fail? What if I'm just a one-trick pony who got lucky? Then you fail, Charlie said simply, and then you get up and try something else. The only real failure is not trying at all. Jason looked at this man who had lost everything, and yet somehow seemed more at peace than Jason felt with all his success. How do you do it? Stay hopeful when everything's gone wrong? Because everything going wrong taught me something important, Charlie said, his voice carrying hard-won wisdom. None of the external stuff, the house, the job, the status, none of that was really me. When it all got stripped away, I discovered I was still here, still breathing, still thinking, still capable of kindness and connection, still capable of change. I feel like I've built this prison around myself, Jason admitted, made of expectations and image and money and contracts, and I don't know how to break out of it. Same way you'd break out of any prison, Charlie said with a slight smile. One bar at a time. As the night wore on, they talked about dreams deferred and paths not taken, about the difference between being successful and being fulfilled. Charlie shared stories from his life before homelessness, his work as a carpenter, his love of building things with his hands, the simple pleasure of creating something useful and beautiful. Jason found himself opening up about his early days as a competitive diver, the discipline and artistry of the sport, how it had taught him about precision and commitment. You know what strikes me about diving? Charlie said thoughtfully. It's one of the few sports where you have to let go completely to succeed. No halfway measures, no safety nets. Just commitment to the dive. I haven't felt that kind of commitment to anything in years, Jason realized. Everything's calculated now, risk managed, safe. Maybe it's time for another dive, Charlie suggested. As dawn began to break over London, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and gold, Jason felt something he hadn't experienced in years: clarity. Not the artificial clarity of action movie plots, but the real thing, a sense of purpose and direction that came from within rather than from external validation. I need to ask you something, Jason said as they prepared to part ways. Why did you talk to me tonight? Really talk to me, not just ask for money or a photo. Charlie smiled, gathering his sleeping bag around him. Because I could see you were lost, same as I was once. And because someone helped me when I needed it most, not with money or pity, but with truth. Figured it was time to pass that along. What can I do for you? Jason asked, reaching for his wallet. Charlie held up a hand, stopping him. You've already done it, mate. You saw me as a person worth talking to instead of a problem to walk around. That means more than you know. But Jason persisted. There must be something. A shelter, a program, some way I can help. If you really want to help, Charlie said, standing and shouldering his meager possessions, don't waste the gift you've been given. Use that platform of yours for something that matters. Tell stories worth telling. As Charlie walked away into the brightening morning, Jason remained on the bridge for a few more moments. The city was waking up around him, early commuters beginning their daily routines, the Thames flowing steadily toward the sea. He felt different somehow, lighter, despite being soaked through and exhausted. For the first time in years, Jason Statham knew exactly what he needed to do next. 3 months later, he would surprise everyone by turning down a lucrative franchise deal to star in a small, character-driven drama about a man reconnecting with his estranged father. The film would earn him his first Oscar nomination and remind him why he'd fallen in love with acting in the first place. But all of that was still to come. For now, he simply stood on Waterloo Bridge, watching London come alive and remembering what it felt like to be truly awake.